America is staring down the barrel of a major financial crisis. Earlier this week, America's Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen sent alarm bells ringing across the global financial system by warning that the United States could run out of money and default on its debts as early as June 1st. This crisis threatens the global economy and may have terrible consequences for India as well. Hindustan Times breaks down this controversy. So, what is this crisis about? In 3 words, America's debt ceiling. That refers to a limit placed by America's legislature on how much debt the US government can take on to pay for its armed forces and social services like education. America's government relies heavily on borrowing and taking on more debt to meet its routine expenditures. So the legislature votes to increase the debt ceiling time and again. In 2021, the debt ceiling was raised to a staggering $31.4 trillion. At one time, raising the debt ceiling was an uncontroversial policy in America. From 1960 onwards, it was raised 78 times to allow the US government to borrow more money and carry out its routine functions. However, America is now a divided country, and the debt ceiling has become a contentious issue as partisan divides have hijacked basic governance. The opposition Republicans, generally seen as the party of limited government and low spending, have demanded spending cuts from President Biden in return for increasing the debt ceiling again. President Biden, who leads the ruling Democratic Party, has dug his heels in and has refused to negotiate. This prolonged standoff means that no compromise is in sight, even as America comes close to hitting the debt ceiling. Finance Minister Janet Yellen warned that if the country could not borrow more money, it would soon run out of cash to pay for even basic services like national defense and education. Goldman Sachs economists have estimated that a breach of the debt ceiling would immediately halt about 1/10 of US economic activity. According to center-left think tank Third Way, a breach that leads to a default could cause the loss of 3 million jobs, add $130,000 to the cost of an average 30-year mortgage, and raise interest rates enough to increase the national debt by $850 billion, according to the Council on Foreign Relations, an American think tank. So why does America's economic crisis matter all the way here in India? It's important because a financial crisis in America would almost certainly hurt India's economic growth. Firstly, if America's government loses the ability to borrow more money, it will be unable to pay off its earlier debts. A debt default will lead to financial institutions globally dumping US government securities and pulling out of the American market. Since the US economy has typically been a bedrock of global economic growth, the world economy would likely suffer. The global economy, which relies on a strong US economy, would begin to slide into a financial crisis and likely a recession. US Treasury debt is the world's benchmark safe asset, and its interest rates act as the basis for pricing of countless financial products and transactions around the globe. The US dollar is also the world's premier reserve currency. A default would send shockwaves through the global financial markets and would likely cause credit markets worldwide to freeze and stock markets to plunge, said economists working for the White House. The global economy, which has already seen several shocks as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, would likely be hammered into recession. Kristalina Georgieva, the chief of the International Monetary Fund, has already warned that the world may be facing a lost decade of economic growth. This would certainly have an impact on India's growth prospects, which have already suffered due to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Secondly, the United States is also India's largest trade partner. In 2021, overall US-India bilateral trade in goods and services reached a record $157 billion. A weakening of the US economy would also have severe consequences for the bilateral economic relationship and therefore for India's economic growth. This would especially be the case for growth sectors like information technology, which have benefited from closer ties to clients in countries like the United States. Finally, a default by the American government on its debt would also dent America's financial credibility and weaken faith in it as the economy of first choice in the global economy. Further, the US dollar's status as the world's global reserve currency would also suffer. That will strengthen efforts by China to pitch its economy and currency as a global reserve currency and global reserve economy, which would also likely cut against India's interests. The debt ceiling crisis demonstrates once again that the fate of the global economy remains too dependent on America's economic performance. As the political drama over the US debt ceiling plays out, that overdependence on America may prove costly to India and the world.